Hello and welcome to AEF TV in association with Engerati. I'm joined now by Ifey, who we've interviewed before. So thank you for coming back. You're a council member for the Regional Electricity Authority from the ECOWAS region, as it's called, and just to sort of get to the point so that we can cover what we need to cover in the time we've got. There were a lot of people from the finance and power side of things saying that, okay, in order for the deal flow to happen, you need transparency in the regulatory environment, and you need to create that. We've had a number of the country regulators reinforcing that point and say, well, by and large, they agree. There are subtle nuances on that side of things. But what I wanted to ask you is, what role and what can you bring to bear as a regional regulation play into, again, maybe even adding yet another layer of transparency and things like that into that regulatory environment?
Thanks a lot. I do agree with you that regulation has a very key role to play in the success of power sector infrastructure. More so from the regional point of view. If we're looking at the huge cost or the huge investment involved in putting in place cross-border interconnection networks, then you will agree with me that no investor would want to put in that huge amount of money without having some degree of certainty as to recovery of investments. And that is where the regulator has an important role to play. For us at ARERA, what we've done in the few years that we've been in place is to ensure that we put in place the kind of legal and regulatory arrangements that will give a degree of comfort to investors in the regional interconnected power transmission system. So for instance, we've had to deal with issues of putting in place a regional transmission pricing methodology for transmission pricing. We've talked about putting in place a regional market rule so that it is very clear to all the market participants what their rules, what their obligations, what their liabilities are when it comes to participating in the regional electricity.
And is that with a view to creating a framework that enables interconnection between countries and things like that? Is that where we're pushing this?
Exactly, because prior to now, of course, we've had a number of cross-border PPAs between countries, but ARERA had cause to review some of these agreements and we realized, they did work or that they were put in place, but they were not the kind of agreements that would attract commercial financing to the power sector, because these were agreements that were put in place when most of the utilities were state-owned and were fully funded by government.
Right.
But as the move down is to try and get more and more private sector participation in the power market, it is very important that you have in place a set of legal and commercial agreements that would give investors that comfort that if they do, that will give financiers the comfort that if they put in their money into these infrastructure agreements, that there is a genuine, that there will be certainty that they are going to recover costs. So that is where the regulatory interface comes in at this point.
So where would you think that the sort of ECOWAS region is on that? I mean, how mature are things in that region? What's left to do?
Well, we've done quite a bit. I mean, it's early days yet. We are hoping to start the phase one of the regional electricity market maybe by the end of the year. We have in place an approved market rule. We are trying to tidy up on the transition to pricing methodology. We are tidying up on the templates for the contractual agreements, that is the PPA, the connection agreements, and all of those things. Those are the key documents that you're going to need in order to fast-track the development of the regional market. Then on the part of the West African Power Pool, they have been able to develop an energy master plan, basically, that is going to govern interconnections in the next 5 years and all of that. So that integrated planning is really, really key in ensuring that you do not have the normal gap you have between generation and transmission. So for us, it's important that that synergy is in place, and that is where WAP has come in to put in place that master plan, which they have submitted to ERERA and which has also been approved by the ECOWAS Council of Ministers.
And that master plan is kind of reinforcing investment in the transmission and distribution network, basically.
Essentially, but more so transmission, basically, because what WAP is actually keen on doing is improving transmission interconnections among the member states.
And I know you've been in a transmission workshop, so that's quite a neat link there. Can you tell us what are some of the things that were discussed in the workshop that you're able to share, right? I understand some of these are sort of under the Chatham House rule, but it'd be quite interesting because I think the transmission is almost like the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's concentrating on power generation, but we got to get this stuff to people.
Yes. I think some of the key issues that were discussed was, first of all, like we talked about, the need for integrated planning. Your planning generation, you must also at the same time plan for the transmission infrastructure to ensure that you have sufficient capacity to be able to take up that generation. Another issue was the issue of managing losses. How do we ensure that utilities better manage transmission losses? Because in Africa, for instance, we have very huge transmission losses from anything between 20 to 40%.
Well, you've got huge distances,
very
right?
huge, exactly.
Right.
And
we're still dealing with the laws of physics, you know. It's hard
yes,
to overcome.
And for a region that is energy starved, you cannot continue to accept this level of losses.
So are you looking at new technologies?
New technologies, and issue of governance too is very, very important, because that was actually raised during the discussion. We talked about the need for regulators to be more hands-on in terms of enforcing some of the quality of service issues that they have been able to establish in their various divisions, to be sure that the utilities themselves are able to put in place some of the targets that have been set in terms of loss reduction and the rest of it. Of course, we also talked about the need for more regional interconnections and the utility and value of having that as a way of dealing with the issue of economies of scale, especially for the much smaller countries we have in the region.
And then also, I bring in the issue of new technologies for a reason, because there are, in China, they're much the same issues of distance.
Yes.
And they are trialing sort of DC transmission because they found that reduces the losses and so on. So how important is that area of it as well? So that what we're doing is we're putting in the latest technology that is affordable, and again yet further reducing the transmission losses.
I think that area of innovative technology, of course, was discussed. But again, we also looked at the alternative choices of talking about off-grid and mini-grid system, because indeed, yes, it is ideal to extend the grid as much as possible to a whole lot of areas. But there are times that the reality on ground makes it more sensible or makes it more realistic to actually begin to grab off-grid and mini-grid systems. So these are some of the other alternatives that we also discussed in addition to the kind of technology that we talked about.
So what we're looking at, we're coming to the end of our time here, but just to wrap up, so if I, just to ask you that question, so what we're looking at is a distributed energy system where we'll have off-grid mini-grids.
Exactly.
But do you not think that those off-grid mini-grids need to be what I call transmission ready, so that when the power line does come, you can connect them, or is the view that actually they're fine on their own?
My view on this is that some of those would actually be fine on their own. I do not believe that ultimately that everybody has to be connected to the power grid. No. I think that the future is going to show a lot of standalone systems. That is what I think, especially for Africa, as the quickest way of improving access. Transmission grids, of course, have a big role to play, especially when you talk about the urban areas and the peri-urban areas. But as we move further afield to the more remote areas, perhaps the thinking might be to concentrate more on the off-grid and mini-grid systems and find innovative financing mechanisms that will make it possible utilizing renewables for people in those areas to be able to afford the cost of those electricity
and
systems.
go down more of a distributed energy
Exactly.
roadmap. Well, Ifey, as ever, it's been great talking to you. Thank you very much for being here.
Right.
And thank you as well for watching. It's been another interview at AEF TV in association with Engerati. Thanks again.
All right, thank you.